Hello and welcome to Uncensored Conservatism. This is episode number 281. Going to look at some international news. And let's start in Iceland. That only gets any attention when a volcano erupts or Bjork warbles out a song somewhere. So they approved a 4-day, 36-hour work week in 2019 with no reduction in pay. And what has happened? Well, they found out that productivity has remained stable or increased in some sectors. Also, the coddled little Gen Z people are reporting better mental health. That is, some of the fears are not coming to fruition. In Ireland, the government is defending their disinformation policy, which is a nice name for censorship, even though that same government admits they don't have the slightest idea about how their laws and policies impact free speech. And that seems about right for Europe in 2025 when it comes to free speech. Meanwhile, in England, the mayor of London is asking that the city's transport people lift their ban on advertisements for abortion decriminalization, claiming that police have not arrested anyone for having an abortion. The Transportation Board claims the ads disparage the police. And this is Julian Folks of Kent, England, who was arrested and had his home searched after he made a comment on social media site X about pro-Hamas protesters. Held for 8 hours, the police note that his book collection was very Brexity. Well, the former constable was exonerated, and the cops now have to pay him £20,000 for his troubles. Hamid Kaskan of England was fined £336 for burning a Quran outside the Turkish embassy in London and yelling, "Fuck Islam," and "Islam is the religion of terrorists," which is actually correct. I wonder what the fine is for burning a Bible outside the Vatican embassy in London. The Tribune magazine, whose literary editor at one time was none other than George Orwell, was recently purchased by Mohammed Ali Harath, the founder of the Islam Channel in Great Britain. The Islam Channel was fined £23,000 in 2023 for broadcasting anti-Semitic material. Wonder what George Orwell is thinking up there in heaven. British Defense Secretary John Healey has stated the obvious, that Britain has lost control of its borders. This after an estimated 1,200 migrants managed to cross the English Channel in a single day, setting a new daily record. Woohoo! A recent academic study of British birth rates and migrants entering the country indicate that white British people will be a minority in their own country come 2063 at the latest, if current trends continue. And that's called diversity for you. And finally, in Merrill, England, their Air Force is apparently in the market to purchase American-made fighters that are capable of carrying tactical nuclear weapons. They fear a future war with Russia and simply want this deterrent. Across the channel in France, 13 people will go on trial for inciting racial hatred against singer Aya Nakamura of French and Malian descent. That's the country of Mali in Africa. They were protesting her performance at the opening ceremonies of the Olympics last year when they unfurled a banner that read, "This is Paris, not the Bamako market," a reference to a market in Mali. 3 Serbs in France have been arrested and charged with vandalizing with paint several Jewish sites in Paris. French officials believe they may have been paid by the Russian FSB. A French court stripped Marine Le Pen of her mandate in the Calais region. This will not affect her seat in parliament, but mounting legal problems indicate her national standing may take a hit as elections near in 2027. Le Pen is accused of embezzling EU funds for her party's use. I guess she learned something from Nancy Pelosi. Some French politicians are blaming Great Britain for their weak asylum policies, and they tie those policies to the Brexit movement. One politician shown here suggested that when Britain was part of the EU, it was just easier to move them back to France. Yeah, right. France don't want them. That's why they're crossing the English Channel. The French, meanwhile, are trying to fix a loophole in their law that currently prohibits the police from stopping migrants leaving their beaches once they are in the water. Some legislators want to give the police the authority to stop the migrants in shallow water. Whatever. Some right-wing French politicians are speaking out over riots that rocked Paris after a soccer match. They're blaming the riots on, quote-unquote, the scum from the suburbs, otherwise known as Muslims. They are particularly targeting French President Macron for allowing the influx of Arabs and Muslims from Africa and the Middle East. And it's not just in Paris. A family was traumatized when an Algerian invaded their home, and the 21-year-old male demanded the family to turn over their 8-year-old daughter, or else he would kill them with a pitchfork. He also managed to masturbate in front of the family. Incidentally, he was under a deportation order and entered France illegally in 2024. A French police officer who shot and killed a 17-year-old driver known as Nahel M. is slated to go on trial for murder in 2026 at some point. The killing sparked days of riots in 2023. Ursula von der Leyen, head of the European Commission, is backing a Senate bill in the United States that would impose severe sanctions on Russia. The bill would impose a 500% tariff on countries that purchase Russian fossil fuels, and that's going to affect a shitload of European countries. And it's somewhat hypocritical, since European agriculture depends on nitrogen-based fertilizer, which they import from, guess where? Russia. In fact, 13% of all Russian fertilizer exports end up in EU countries. Dutch politics were thrown into turmoil when populist right-wing politician Geert Wilders withdrew from the ruling coalition over immigration concerns. Holland is slated to hold a major NATO summit soon. As a result, new elections will have to take place for their 150-seat parliament, then a coalition government cobbled together after that. And elections won't take place until the fall. A caretaker government will rule until new elections are called, and we know this because they go on break from July 5th, I think, to September 1st. And this is, God, she's good looking. And Eva Vardenbroek, a right-wing commentator, told a crowd in Hungary that Holland and Europe is headed towards a possible civil war over unchecked immigration of Muslims onto the continent. Disagreements over immigration policy in Holland caused the collapse of their government there. Well, Germany's always good for stories, and this week is no different. This is Alice Weidel, who is the head of the German AfD party, which has come under attack by the powers that be in Europe. AfD is very critical of a German law that criminalizes insults against political figures, but now she is using that very law to file charges against those who insult her. Turnaround is fair game, right? The German Federal Justice Minister, Stephanie Hubig, however, is calling for the AfD party to be actually banned. The hell with that insult law. Just ban a political party. It's a tricky proposition that could end democracy in Germany. I mean, banning the top opposition party is certainly ending democracy. German officials reported there were over 11,000 cases of alleged discrimination investigated from gays and minority groups in the country. The top groups noted, however, are migrant youth and women who are wearing headscarves in public. Chancellor Friedrich Merz, while visiting Washington, told President Trump that the increase in anti-Semitic activity in Germany was largely attributable to the influx of Muslims and promised to address the problem. Who knew that Germany has to import Muslims for some anti-Semitism? Experts in Germany also report that approximately 20% of the more than 1 million Muslims in Germany are prone to radicalization and carrying out a terrorist act. Respondents in the poll indicated a strong hatred of Jews, Western culture, and German laws. Yeah, that's a recipe. And statistics out of the Baden-Württemberg region in the eastern part of Germany indicate that foreigners are responsible for 62% of all crimes on public transport, even though they represent 16% of the population in that area. In 2024, there were almost 31,000 identified suspects. The most popular crime? Sexual assault. The German parliament approved a plan to deal with asylum seekers. A list of friendly or safe countries will be generated, and they may be sent there. A previous mandate to immediately turn away asylum seekers at the border was ruled unconstitutional by an administrative court in Berlin. Germany also set a record in 2024 for naturalizations, with almost 250,000 people granted citizenship. The beneficiaries largely hail from Syria and Turkey. Jesus Christ, what can go wrong there? And speaking of Turkey, a Turkish-speaking man allegedly beat and hospitalized an 11-year-old German boy, causing a concussion after he repeatedly kicked the kid in the head. Although the attack was filmed by bystanders, police are refusing to release any pictures of the assailant, only stating that he may have been from Turkey. You're talking in Turkish, I think you're from Turkey. Finland is tightening their permanent residency requirements. Starting next year, you have to be somewhat proficient in Finnish or Swedish, have longer residency requirements, and a work history. Oh, and no more than 3 months of unemployment or social security compensation. Yeah. Swedish authorities are urging an end to international adoptions after several cases of abuse and even human trafficking were documented over many decades. Most of the kids come from Sri Lanka, China, Poland, and Colombia. I mean, imagine sitting in an orphanage in Sri Lanka and you end up in friggin' Sweden. Talk about culture shock. But Sweden's liberal social democrats are moving forward with a plan to disperse migrants through affluent neighborhoods in an attempt at forced integration. The idea is to end areas that tend to be nothing but immigrants. And I don't think this is going to work out too well because, can you imagine like Anna and Bjorn in their, whatever they drive there, living next to Muhammad and Ayan? This isn't going to work out very well. Sweden also announced that they will increase insurance checks on foreign ships. It's known that Russia uses a shadow fleet of ships to bust sanctions and transport grain stolen from Ukraine. And we don't hear too much about Denmark either, but they too had an immigration problem. I say had because they've been cracking down hard on asylum seekers and all other immigrants. Family reunification is no longer recognized, and asylum seekers are denied citizenship and receive no protective status whatsoever. And guess what? It was a left-wing government that did this, so, good for them. Well, Poland elected a hardline right-wing president in Karol Nawrocki, and that seems to be pissing off for some German Poles. They much prefer the more liberal candidate. What really pisses off Germans is the fact Nawrocki will make it more difficult for Germany and the EU to push their agenda. Zolt's Bayer is a Hungarian newspaper correspondent, and he just so happened to be in Paris during those soccer riots I mentioned earlier. He noted the unspeakable. Most of the rioters were Arabs and people of color. Now, 2 people were killed in the riots. There were 692 cases of arson. 1 cop is still in a coma. And there was widespread looting, and there you have your proof that they were people of color. Romanian nationalists recently took over a cemetery that allegedly has Romanian soldiers from World War II. Some others are complaining about the increased politicization of the Roman Orthodox Church, which is becoming more nationalist of late. By the way, they really hate the Hungarians. Sudan's new Prime Minister, Camille Idris, dissolved the caretaker government. No word on when a new government will be formed. And human rights groups and the UN report that civilian casualties are mounting in South Sudan. Some 65,000 people have been displaced thus far, with another 100,000 fleeing into neighboring countries. In effect, the country is on the brink of a major civil war. Okay, MS-23, not 13. MS-23 rebels backed by Rwanda are being blamed for atrocities in neighboring Republic of Congo. The rebels have taken over 2 key towns in the eastern part of that country. They seem more peaceful when they were colonies. This is Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi. He said he was detained and tortured while showing support for another activist in neighboring Tanzania. He claims he was sodomized with various instruments and hung upside down naked. Tanzania, of course, denies the allegations. Hamas reportedly wanted 2 amendments to a proposed U.S.-backed ceasefire in Gaza. The terrorists wanted the ceasefire to be permanent and for Israeli forces to withdraw. The U.S. called the ideas totally unacceptable, and face it, Israeli forces are not going to withdraw, so let's just get over that. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, suggested that if France is intent on their proposal before the UN to create a Palestinian state, they have it within their power to do so. Slice off a piece of the French Riviera and make that the Palestinian state. You gotta love this administration. By the way, officials in Paris denounced the statement and threatened to only export cheap champagne to the United States. Officials are reporting that over 1,700 Alawites in Syria have been killed since March after the fall of Bashar Assad. Additionally, several Alawite women have been kidnapped or disappeared since the Alawites were driven from power. Sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for in the Stone Age part of the world. Oh, this isn't good news. The International Atomic Energy Agency announced that Iran now has over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, which is well above that needed for civilian use and dangerously close to weapons grade. They also report a 50% increase in the past 3 months. This is not good news, and something has to be done. Calling on you, Israel. Marco Rubio rankled some feathers in China when he noted the world will never forget the 1989 crackdown in Tiananmen Square. The Chinese called it an attack on China. The Chinese government has scrubbed all references to the event, and a cemetery where some victims are believed buried was closed off by police. ProPublica, a rather liberal rag, investigated claims that Nike pays employees in Cambodia 1.9 times the required minimum wage in that country. However, it was determined that only 1% of their employees in Cambodia made 1.9 times the minimum wage. The base pay is $1 per hour, and they work 6 days a week. It's a 48-hour work week. Then to make ends meet, they have to work overtime. Way to go there, Nike. Comedian Leonardo Lins was sentenced to 8 years in jail and a $54,000 fine for a comedy video he posted on YouTube that generated over 3 million views. This occurred in Brazil. Apparently, the comedian offended black people, the obese, the elderly, HIV-positive people, homosexuals, indigenous people, evangelicals, Jews, and people with disabilities, which seems like he's an equal opportunity offender. I mean, can you imagine Brazilian law applying to someone like Dave Chappelle? Come on, Brazil. It's a fucking comedy. Mexico reported that in April they saw a decline of 12.1% in remittances to that country, costing their coffers. This is the largest drop in 13 years, with a proposed tax on remittances of 3.5% working its way through the U.S. Senate. Mexico is expecting a further drop in revenue from their compadres here in the United States. Here's the thing. If you came here for a better life, keep your fucking money here. And finally, the U.S. trade deficit dipped dramatically in April. In March, it stood at $140 billion and only $61 billion in April. Say what you want about Trump, his tariffs, and his negotiation style, but the current trade deficit is dramatically below what he inherited when he was sworn in. And that's it. Have a great day and a more pleasant tomorrow.